Welcome to this advanced video diving into the automated test execution via the Tracetronic tool test.guide. It explains how to specify the test resources that your test cases can be executed on. So it provides an in-depth insight into test resource configurations as well as requirements of playbooks and test execution tasks. To understand this video, you should have basic knowledge about the automated test execution with test.guide. For this, just have a look into our two introduction videos. As you already know, playbooks and execution tasks contain the information what to execute and where to execute it. The test source holds information on what you want to execute, and the test resource holds the information where this can be executed. This video only concentrates on how to specify the latter of those parts. The general idea is that test resources have a defined configuration, while playbooks can have certain requirements towards this configuration. The test resource configuration can be anything, for example hardware or software available at the test resource. Playbooks can require a specific configuration at the test resource in order to be able to be executed there. When you execute a playbook, execution tasks will be generated and queued immediately. The test resource requirements are copied from the playbook into the execution tasks. test.guide then tries to match these execution tasks to test resources. That is, it tries to find test resources whose configuration fulfills the requirements. If test.guide finds matching test resources for an execution task, then the task waits until one of the test resources is idle and obtains the task for execution. If test.guide does not find matching test resources, then the execution task is blocked until there is a test resource which fulfills the requirements. The fundament of determining the matching test resources for an execution task are the test resource configurations. These are basically triples of category, label, and value. For each configuration triple, also details can be specified, which again are triples of category, label, and value. The test resource configurations can be specified via the test.guide resource adapter, for example with the resource adapter configuration plugin. There you can specify a separate file which contains the configuration triples. There are also other plugins that can contribute to the resource configuration, for example the software scan plugin or the shell runner plugin. It is completely up to the user to decide which information he wants to provide as a configuration and which plugins he wants to use for this. Just have a look into the resource adapter example config for more information. The configuration triples are sent to test.guide and can be viewed on the details page for the test resource machine. A unique identifier with category XIL and label identifier is always added to the resource configuration by the execution plugin. It can be used, for example, to force a test execution to run on one specific test resource. You can now specify test resource requirements in playbooks. These are also triples of category, label, and value and correspond to the configuration triples of the test resources. At each requirement, you can also define requirement details, which correspond to the details of the configuration triples. The specified requirements will be end-connected. That is, a test resource must fulfill all given test resource requirements to be able to execute a queued execution task. If one requirement is not fulfilled, the task cannot be executed on this test resource. You can also use wildcards in the test bench requirement values. When executing the playbook, the generated test execution tasks are matched to the test resources based on their requirements. You can view the computing matching test resources, for example in the execution task overview page. If no matching test resources were found, the execution task state changes to blocked. this case, the user has to change the configuration of a test resource or add a new test resource which fulfills the requirements to bring the task to execution. If at least one matching test resource was found, the execution task state changes to waiting. It stays in this state until one of the matching test resources is idle and starts the execution of the task. When this happens, the execution task state changes to running, and only the executing test resource will from now be shown in the list of matching test resources. Waiting and blocked execution tasks are always rematched if any change is made to the resource configuration. Execution tasks which are already running are not rematched. They also won't be aborted in the case that the executing test resource does not fulfill the requirements anymore. Today you learned something about test resource configurations and test resource requirements of playbooks and test execution tasks in test.guide. You now know how to easily define on which test resource an execution task can be executed. You may also have a look into our other advanced videos about to automate test execution with test.guide. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the video.